Mewgenics is a gross game, not violent or scary, just gross. And in a medium built on power fantasies, skill expression, and deep mechanics, disgusting isn't exactly the first selling point that comes to mind. And yet, games like The Binding of Isaac have built massive audiences around mucus, filth, and bodily horror. So what's going on here? Are these games just good and happen to be gross? Are we just disgusting human beings? Or is there something deeper pulling us in? Grossness in games can be a tool, one that developers use to shape our understanding of their worlds. Let's take a grimy, mucus-soaked journey and find out. Now, before we get too deep into this, it's important to define what we really mean by gross. Disgust can apply to something as mild as seeing someone pick their nose, or something far worse like passing something that's been left to rot in the summer heat. Disgust exists to protect us. Like fear, it helps us avoid danger. When something smells bad, that's your body warning you it can make you sick. And when you see a wound, there's that immediate knee-jerk recoil. These are negative reactions by design. They push us away. So why would anyone deliberately seek them out? What's the appeal of being grossed out? The strange thing about disgust is that it doesn't just repel us, it demands our attention. And once we feel it, it's hard to ignore, because alongside our instinct to avoid, we also have an instinct to understand. We're curious, and sometimes the very things that repel us are the things we most want to investigate.
Oh, but Big Bad Burns, what does this have to do with my new cat breeding game?
Well, don't worry, my inquisitive viewer. That's because you have benign masochism, a term coined by psychologist Paul Rosen. Basically, what this boils down to is that we like to experience unpleasant things in a safe, controlled environment. Think about spicy chilies, roller coasters, and bungee jumping.
Not spelunking, never spelunking. You will crawl in the hole, into a cave, and you'll get stuck and you'll die. You'll be able to move and you'll die. It's dumb, don't do it.
Well, this might not seem like it has a lot to do with Binding of Isaac or Mewgenics at first, because they might just come across as gross or edgy just for the sake of it, but I think there is some context, particularly with Binding of Isaac. I think a ton of the gross elements are things we're told as kids are bad. The main takeaway here is that all those fears and revulsions, well, they're now able to be experienced in an environment where they can't hurt us physically or socially, and this being experienced in a game helps to create a feedback loop indicative to gaming. Of course, this doesn't apply to everyone. Not everyone is going to be drawn to these games. Most people don't want to stare at poop and fetuses and bugs for hours on end, and that's exactly the point. Some people simply won't enjoy this kind of experience, even if it is safe. I would never personally go bungee jumping. I don't care how safe it is. My brain won't allow it. I'll just play Mirror's Edge instead. And a huge part of this is that games are safe, particularly with the art style here. If Mewgenics was presented as some high fidelity, realistic game, it would be unbearable. It wouldn't be playful or absurd, it would just be disturbing. Instead, its world is filtered through these exaggerated cartoonish characters, goofy cats, and silly animations. This helps to create a distance between you and what's actually happening. The subject matter might be grotesque, but the presentation makes it digestible, and this distance is crucial. You're not experiencing this as reality, you're experiencing it as a game. From the safety of your home, through the filter of stylization, with full control over your actions. Even in games designed purely to unsettle you like Alien Isolation, the safety still exists. You can turn it off, you can walk away. There are no consequences except emotional ones, which is why I've never finished it. The xenomorph scares the absolute shit out of me. So that's it, right? The magic formula. You make a gross game, you sell loads of copies, and you make the big bucks. Well, no, grossness alone isn't enough to carry a game. You can't just make something disgusting and expect people to engage with it for hours on end. The game still has to be fun and rewarding on its own right. Grossness isn't a substitute for good design. It's something that enhances it. Mewgenics is a good example of this. Full transparency, SRPGs aren't really my genre. It's not something I would naturally gravitate towards, and it wasn't a game I immediately fell in love with. But even from a short time of it, it's obvious how much depth and care has gone into its systems, the team building, the long-term progression, the way each cat develops and evolves. It's all extremely robust, which makes it even funnier that with all that depth, it's framed through cat sex, and that framing matters. It transforms what would otherwise be abstract numbers and systems into something tangible. The grossness isn't just there for shock value, it reinforces the physicality of what you're doing. It gives texture to the mechanics, and that in turn allows you to engage with this messy, unsettling process. And the same applies to Binding of Isaac. It's a world filled with things that are deliberately unpleasant, disturbing body imagery, decay, and fear. But those elements serve a purpose. These externalize Isaac's fears. His anxieties become physical obstacles you have to confront and overcome. It's not gross for the sake of it, it serves the narrative. It gives weight to your progress. The movement and the combat feel very fluid, and there's always a sense of discovery throughout the game, but the grossness simply amplifies the emotional tone of that experience. You see the same principle in Cruelty Squad, which is easily one of the grossest games I've ever played, but it's also one of my favorites. It's a squelching, nauseating, morally bankrupt world. That aesthetic reinforces the game's themes. The corruption in the game is so visceral, you can feel it oozing out of the screen. The game initially kind of comes across as a shitpost, but it's not. The world you're inhabiting is actually sick, and that's the key element in all this. Grossness works best when it isn't the point, but it's the amplifier. But all of this is null and void if the fundamental game design isn't there. It needs to be there, or else it's not something that's worth engaging with. And it is possible that the grossness could put you off. Not all of the grossness is the same. Someone being abhorrently greedy can feel disgusting. Compulsive liars can feel disgusting. Even something that falls into the uncanny valley, something that looks almost human but not quite, it can trigger the sense of revulsion. None of these things are physically revolting, but they still provide the same emotional response, which suggests that grossness isn't just about what something is, it's about how it makes you feel. Grossness can be disturbing, but it can also be funny. It can be shocking, it can be tragic or surreal. It's an incredibly flexible emotional tool, and how it's framed determines how we interpret it. There's actually been research into why gross things can be funny. For disgust to become humor, it needs three things. It has to violate expectations, it has to be harmless, and it has to be understandable. In other words, it needs to be taboo but safe. And that's exactly where games like Mewgenics and the Binding of Isaac operate. They present things that would normally make us uncomfortable, but they frame them in ways that are exaggerated or absurd, because most things in these games can't actually hurt us in reality, no matter how gross we might find them. We can engage with disgust from a position of safety and sometimes even laugh at it. And people must be engaging with the game because the cultural impact of these games can't be understated. The Binding of Isaac has sold millions of copies over its lifetime. And within the first 36 hours of release, Mewgenics sold over 500,000 copies. These aren't niche, underground experiences. They have genuine, massive appeal, which raises an interesting question. If disgust is supposed to repel us, why are so many people drawn to it? Part of the answer is that this isn't a new phenomenon. Throughout history, people have always been drawn to the grotesque. Paintings, literature, films have long explored decay, corruption, and uncomfortable realities of existence. These themes persist because they resonate. They reflect parts of life that are difficult to confront but impossible to ignore. What's changed is how we experience them together. The internet has accelerated this process. People who might have once engaged with these ideas alone can now share them instantly. Communities form around these experiences, and there's something bonding about that. When something makes you uncomfortable, but you know thousands of other people are willingly engaging with it too, it transforms that experience. It stops feeling isolating and starts feeling shared. Disgust in this context becomes cultural language, not just something to avoid, but something to explore together. Philosopher Colin McGinn, who described disgust as a philosophical emotion since it reflects, at base, our existential terror and ambivalence about being souls tied to mortal bodies. It forces us to confront something uncomfortable about ourselves, that we aren't just minds, we're physical bodies, biological and temporary. Disgust is often tied to decay, rot, disease and corruption. These things remind us, consciously or not, that we're subject to the same rules, that we will eventually break down, which makes it kind of strange that we would willingly engage with these ideas at all. But when a game presents those themes in a space where we have control, it changes the emotional outcome. Instead of feeling powerless, we're able to confront them and interact with them. What would normally disgust or scare us becomes something we can work against and triumph. And when games frame disgust through humor or absurdity. It allows us to face our mortality. It takes difficult to deal with topics and brings it out into the light. I'm not saying Mewgenics is going to cure your existential dread, but there's something strangely empowering about being able to engage with those uncomfortable realities safely and to look directly at something that would normally repel you and then laugh at it. But what about when the laughter stops? When the enjoyment and empowerment crosses a line? When does it stop being a matter of bringing disgust into the light to overcome it, and instead becomes exploitative? When it exists purely for shock value, it can begin to lose that meaning. Films like The Human Centipede, for example, lean heavily into grotesque imagery as their central identity. People are drawn to them, but often for the reaction itself, the shock and the spectacle. The disgust becomes the product rather than a tool in service of something else. This isn't necessarily invalid, but it changes the relationship. The experience becomes less about engaging with ideas and more about testing the audience's intolerance. Stylization plays a major role in maintaining that balance. Games like Mewgenics and the Binding of Isaac create distance through absurdity and abstraction. Their worlds are exaggerated and symbolic. They allow the player to engage with uncomfortable ideas without feeling grounded in literal reality. But that distance becomes harder to maintain when real people enter the equation, because at that point the disgust isn't directed at an abstract system or a fictional world. It's directed at a person, and that shifts the dynamic entirely. Mewgenics, it largely stays within its absurd fictional framing, but moments that reference real individuals, even indirectly, raise questions about where that line sits, whether the discomfort is serving the experience or whether it risks turning a person into a spectacle. And that distinction matters because disgust, when used carefully, allows us to confront uncomfortable truths safely, but when used carelessly, it can stop being a tool for reflection and start becoming something else entirely. There are many things I find gross. I can't even touch a piece of old wet food without gagging. It sickens me. But in terms of consumable media, maybe I'm desensitized, but it doesn't really affect me. I've always thought it was because of some kind of disconnect. These things aren't real, so why would I let it bother me? But I also don't particularly have great pleasure from it. I wouldn't play these games if they weren't also fun. I enjoy Cruelty Squad and Binding of Isaac, and while I may not hold Mewgenics to the same reverence as those games, I can still understand that it is a good, well-crafted game, and the themes and the aesthetic add character to it that would not necessarily be there if it was made by a different developer. At the end of the day, the point I'm trying to make is that I can take or leave the gross, but it clearly has a place in our society. It's there for people to experience disgust and filth without all the taboos and dangers it may pose in real life. There are different degrees to this, and as long as nobody's getting hurt along the way, then all power to those who seek it. But I feel that it works best when it serves the work that it's in. As Marcus Tullius Cicero said, the greatest pleasures are only narrowly separated from disgust. And maybe that's why games like Mewgenics exist, to skirt that line and to challenge our preconceptions. We often strive to find the limits of what is appropriate, and that's why we enjoy these games so much. They let us push that boundary and have fun doing it. Thanks for watching my video. Let me know down below in the comments what was your grossest video game moment. For me, it's the eyeball operation scene from Dead Space. And if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and remember to subscribe for more content like this. Bye.